My name is David Aaronson. I'm the founder and CEO of Refuel EV Solutions. I've been in the commercial real estate business for over 40 years. And just a couple years ago, I recognized that there is a transition going on from gas cars to an electric vehicles. And I looked at how it was going to affect commercial real estate. And I decided that I was going to start a company that specializes in putting up EV charging stations across the country. The transition to the electrical transportation will heavily affect the commercial real estate industry because it's going to need to provide the infrastructure to refuel the EV owners' vehicles. It's no different than the gas stations did 100+ years ago when we transitioned from the horse and buggy, to the gas station or gas usage. The gas stations provided the infrastructure. Property owners are going to have to pay attention to this in order to stay competitive. We're already starting to see the beginnings of this as tenants, especially in the apartment industry, are choosing to locate in properties that have EV charging stations. So it's no longer going to be just an amenity, it's going to be necessary infrastructure. New habits will be formed by the EV owner's ability to refuel their vehicle. There's a lot of issues facing us building out the infrastructure. Most people look at the overall grid as being able to handle it, but that's really not too much the issue. People look to charge their cars at night when there's plenty of electricity to go around. But the states and the municipalities have yet to really come up with any consistent building code to dictate how these charging stations will be implemented. Certain states like California and Portland, Oregon have already come up with a plan. In our opinion, it's an overkill, but those are the minority. Most cities don't have anything on their building codes addressing EV charging. So now's a very good time to be investing in EV charging infrastructure, because the early adopters may get a grant from the city, the state, or the utility, because they're all looking to install infrastructure at this time. As EVs become mainline, you may not see those grants available. So the early adopters, they get a chance to take advantage of the grants. Also, we're starting to see more and more people as the new sales have passed 10% of all vehicles sold. We're seeing more and more people show up on the road with different electric vehicles. Over the next 2 years, there's going to be 80 different models coming out, and many of them are going to be priced under $50,000. So they're no longer going to be showing up in just single-family residential owners. They're going to be multifamily owners. They're going to be condominium, owners, and every one of those people are going to decide where to live based on whether or not they can refuel their cars. So really, the very first thing you need to do if you're buying a property or you own a property, you need to understand what the cost is to and what the capabilities are to put up EV charging stations. We've done business in some states where they bury the electrical lines, and that's much more expensive. I'm talking hundreds of thousands of dollars to put up additional electricity to host these charging stations. And then in other states, it's plentiful and it's easy, and the lines are overhead, and it doesn't really cost more than about $5,000 to $10,000. So you really need to understand what your property's capabilities are and get ready for it, if nothing else. In most properties, just retaining one resident or attracting one tenant will provide the return necessary to justify this investment. If you're an office building, for example, and you don't have the ability to refuel your tenants' cars, that tenant may go somewhere else where they can get their residents' cars refueled, especially multifamily. Hotels, another great example. So we're just at the very beginning, and it's kind of like the Wild West out there. A lot of products, A lot of different companies, a lot of different offerings at this point in time. I think the biggest issue that commercial real estate owners have is understanding that when their property was built, that there's probably not enough electricity available to host the number of charging stations that will be needed to meet the future demand. So that's the first thing, and understanding then how you pay for it and where the money's going to come from. It's not just a matter of the utility company may need to come provide additional electrical capacity. It's also, what are you going to do with it when you get to the property? Where are you going to put the charging stations? And so I think that that's the number one problem. But then there's a myriad of other issues that come up. For example, people try to understand, does this make financial sense to do it now? Well, the other side of that is there are a lot of grants that are being offered. The other thing is, there's a lot of products on the market and a lot of manufacturers, and there's a lot of misinformation that we see going on. And I think that's the other really big issue for property owners is, who do you talk to? How do you understand it? Who do you go to understand? Do you go to a vendor to understand what they're saying? There's just a general lack of knowledge throughout the industry at this point, whether it's the property owner, whether it's the property manager, whether it's the electrician installing the equipment, whether it's the engineer who's designed the electrical plan. There's really nowhere to go right now for good, consistent, unbiased information. Right off the bat, they generate revenue because you can resell the electricity to the user at a higher price than its cost. So the EV charging station is making, or the owner of the station is making, a spread between the cost of their electricity and what they're able to sell it for. The other thing that we've seen is, in some surveys done in the multifamily industry, that apartment renters are willing to pay, I think the survey said $25 a month more per month to have the ability to refuel their electric vehicles where they live. So those are two obvious ones. The one that's not so obvious is that apartment owner or that apartment renter that owns an electric vehicle, and they decide to rent at your apartment project because you can refuel their vehicle. In a case like that, it's very simple. Assume your average rent is $1,500 a month, $18,000 a year. That's over $350,000 of value created because that one tenant moved into your apartment project because they could fuel their car at home. Commercial real estate owners are going to need to get used to the fact that they're going to have to provide the infrastructure to host EV charging stations, because they will no longer be competitive if they don't have these. There are 22 million apartments, according to the National Multi-Housing Council, of which apparently there are 18 million vehicles that are driven by apartment residents. One day, not in my lifetime, but one day, probably 50 years from now, or certainly if you look at the age of the properties that are being built today during the useful life of these properties, it's very possible 100% of those 18 million residents will be needing to refuel their cars. We think that one charging port can serve 10 electric vehicle a month. Okay, so in that case, there is a pent-up demand for 1.8, or there will be demand for 1.8 to 2 million EV charging stations in the multifamily properties around the country. The first place people are going to want to refuel is at their home. So we believe the pecking order is multifamily and condominiums. If they can't get refueled there, it's going to be at their office where their car sits 3, 4, 6, 8 hours a day. And then there's the hotels and motels. They're all going to all of them are going to have them. And then, of course, you look at the retail properties. And the question on the retail properties is, what kind of charging station are you going to put up? And if you're going to put up a charging station that only gives 15 miles an hour, you're probably not going to find many people going out of their way to your shopping center to use that machine. But if you put up a charging station where your car can get refueled in 20 minutes, then people will go out of their way and give patronage to your retail tenants. The big question I have is for the gas stations in the future. What's going to happen to these gas stations as we know them? And I think they have a real battle on their hands, because the fastest charging station can refuel these cars in a minimum of 15 minutes to 30 minutes. And what is the person refueling their car going to do for those 15 to 30 minutes? Are they going to go in that convenience store for that period of time? Are they going to feel comfortable sitting at their car? My guess is that people will use other avenues to get charged if they have those. So right now we go to gas stations as our primary mode for refueling. That's the number one place you refuel, and it will change the transformation to electric vehicles will change that pecking order. It'll be at home, at night, and then when you go out. So it'll change those things.